Bam! Back in action after a much-needed week off. You know what it is. This is the Bottom Line Podcast, episode 79. This is also a rendition of this podcast of the MMA Variety 42, 43. Can't remember off the top of my head. Not really that important. Here's what is important, though. We're going to get right into the meat and bones of it right away. You listen to this podcast, you know the man to my left, AJ Schullo. You know what we do. You know it's normally centered around the UFC, but this is a very special week. Is it, my friend? AJ, how you doing, by the way?
Good. Yeah, very special indeed, as you said. First Contender Series breakdown together. Looking forward to it. It was your very crafty and neat idea to break these fights down because it's not a huge talking point in the space that we're in, partially due to the fact that we've been on a huge hiatus here, but also just people I think are more focused on, Bellator, the UFC cards on Saturday. So I'm really glad that we're hopping on and doing this here for a Tuesday night of fights.
Can I take issue with something you just said real quick? Do you think that Bellator this week is more highly anticipated than the Contender Series? Just your honest answer. Yes or no?
I think I would say yes, slightly, just because it's like the real, like a bigger promo, whereas like the Contender Series is kind of like the segue point in between like, regional and UFC.
The platform to get you to the platform, right?
Exactly. So I would lean Bellator of the two.
Potentially. I mean, it's a nice card too, man. I mean, those prelims look pretty good too. Christian Edwards is on that card. Ton Levy's on that card. Interesting. But for those of you that are probably already aware, if you clicked on this, you're probably in search of the exact content we've been masquerading around saying we're going to deliver tonight. And that is a complete breakdown of tomorrow night's first installment of this summer's Contender Series. Something that has become literally my second favorite thing in the world behind the NCAA tournament, who I could never cheat on. But this is my favorite thing in the combat sports space. I think it's one of, if not the most brilliant. Tough was the idea that saved the UFC. I think this is arguably their best idea they ever had. Blah, 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 blah. If you are in this MMA fandom space, media space, whatever you like to call it, you watch sanctioned violence, you know what the Contender Series is all about. And tomorrow night we get going. However, quick housekeeping. Like, subscribe, go ahead, tell your friends, tell your grandma, whoever. If you dig this kind of content and want to use this kind of content to help you in your endeavors picking these fights going forward, listen to these fights, or if you just want to hear a good conversation about some really high-level fights, and that's exactly what we're going to get on the Contender Series all summer long, no exception tomorrow night. However, James Lynch coming out an hour ago, and of course, what did I say to you on Twitter the other night? Over under 10.5 fights over these next 10.5 weeks that we're going to break film down on, we're going to take notes on, we're going to be ready to talk about, and boom, fight's off. That fight, Kenny Cross, who was originally supposed to fight Kevin Seiler, guy who won last summer on the Contender Series. He would have been my first pick in a little segment we would have had later in terms of talking about Seiler. However, Seiler fell out, and now, according to James Lynch an hour ago, some sort of problem with DeMonte Robinson's eye gave the commission enough reason to scrap it. Is there anything that maybe I'm leaving out there? Do you know anything else more about that? I just read the headline.
Yeah, I saw that too. And then I noticed that he missed weight. I don't know that had something to do with it. Like you said, he did take it on short notice. So it's like understandable for sure. But that's the extent basically of what I know.
Unfortunate too, DeMonte Robinson, a guy from Canton, Ohio, solid wrestling base, 6-1-1. He'll have a potential to get back here. And I mean, the guy you really got to be gutted for is Kenny Cross here. You think you're going to be fighting Kevin Seiler. You think you're going to have a replacement. You're going to be all ready to go. I assume everybody made weight and everything like that. And then next thing you know, because that's the last hurdle, right? People talk about the weight cut as the fight before the fight, right? And you think once you've made weight and you think that it's official, and you think once the commission screams that number that signifies that you've made said weight, you're good to go. You're in the clear. The hard part's over. So it's got to be so unsettling to have all of that done and then have someone call you, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, man, your opponent, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunate. I would have liked to see that fight. I bet a pretty penny, though, that Kenny Cross, especially, we were talking about it off the air, Kenny Cross is a guy that surely should get another slot on the Contender Series later this year. That guy fights with moxie, man. That guy fights, like I said to him off the air, he fights like he thinks he's John Wayne Parr. I mean, this dude is crazy confident on the feet, blah, 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 for another day. So here's how this is going to go. We're going to break down these 4 fights. We're going to debut a segment at the end, which includes a trivia question that I will ask to AJ to determine who will get the first pick in a said draft. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'm just excited to see if I can stump you on the trivia question. That being said, let's get into it. So at the bottom, lightweight is where we start. Whether it's Luke Flores, whether it's Ty Flores, I have no idea what they want me to call him, but I guess he goes by both. Undefeated, or 9-1, coming off a Combate America's stint. And here's what's crazy. He was featured in the first summer of the Contender Series and fought on the very last fight, on the very last week, against a guy in Matt Frivola. Obviously, if you know and you watch the UFC, you can probably put 2 and 2 together. Say, since Matt Frivola is in the UFC right now, Frivola did win that fight. That is Flores' only professional loss. But, man, it was a crazy fight. And ironically enough, Flores goes from last fight of the summer on the Contender Series in 2017 to the very first fight on the installment of 2020. We'll get into Jordan Levitt in a second, but, you know, Flores is a guy. How much do you think he could have possibly improved since then, man? I mean, you know, 3 years and he only fought twice. One of them ended by injury really quickly. Where are you going to be looking in terms of seeing where he could potentially improve from the last time he had an attempt at a UFC contract?
In terms of how much he's improved, I would kind of give him the benefit of the doubt in that, like you just had up there, he's got 10 professional fights only. He's in his early 30s, but like for MMA years, you know, he's still young. Those improvements that we see out of him on a fight-to-fight basis can be pronounced, assuming that he's, you know, in the gym working. I looked at his Instagram, and he seems to be doing just that. What he needs to improve, though, most compellingly, though, is the takedown defense. That's what you alluded to, the fight with Frivola, which he eventually lost by submission. Frivola took him down a couple times, was able to threaten with submission attempts, and that will be like basically the difference maker here. I do think that he's like pretty solid and well-rounded, but that area, you know, is the area that he'll need to, you know, hope that he could improve to probably keep the fight standing. I do think that on the ground, his opponent here in Jordan Leavitt is going to look to take it there, Levitt. But yeah, in terms of like what he has going for him, he has that experience on the Contender Series. He's more experienced than Jordan, and you know, those factors alone could mean, you know, big dividends for him in the matchup, because we don't know what Jordan is like as he moves his way up the ranks. Jordan's only 6-0. Big opportunity here. Hasn't fought the level of competition that Jose has. So I'd say that like experience and just overall feel for under the bright lights are certainly some things that Jose has going for him.
I'm glad you brought that up when you talk about the competition. Here's where I'll give it to you. However, there's a caveat in that. You aren't incorrect, in my opinion, necessarily. However, here is where I will say there's an interesting caveat there. Levitt, most of Levitt's opponents, right, are fairly inexperienced. One of the most key, what matters very little when going into a fist fight, anything having to do with anything other than these two things right here. But when we're talking about something that involves as much game planning and tactical awareness as this, sometimes these numbers matter. What I'm getting to is Levitt, while his previous opponents are lacking in experience, you can make a case that tit for tit, talent for talent, they're better than Flores's outside of Frivola. When you take Frivola out of the equation, you do the math. The previous opponents of Flores combined to be 54, 50, and 2, right? You take Frivola out of that equation, 45, 49, and 1. So most of the guys that he's fought have had losing records. Levitt, here's the big thing for me with Levitt. There's a lot of unknowns there. Can he grapple his ass off? Yes. Is he going to be a threat to submit you? Yes. Is he very capable of winning this fight by submission? Yes. Is he, at least to me, tell me if you agree with me, I get the feeling when I watch him on the feet, he says in interviews he's comfortable. He says in interviews, everybody that's inside the gym with me knows how I can strike. We need to see that on film. I see a guy who clearly and obviously exuberates confidence in his grappling game, and rightfully so. However, almost to his own fault, he looks at times to be almost too comfortable allowing guys into his guard. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do. He kind of reminds me of like Brendan Allen in a way. Like, I think it's kind of like not irrelevant, but like it can be irrelevant to this matchup in terms of like who has the striking advantage. Because, like you said, while it is nice to hear him say from his own words that he's improving and comfortable there, all of his fights literally hit the ground like right away. Like it's like get right to it. Like Brandon Allen fights, it reminded me of that. So I do think that ultimately the fight is going to be won or lost on the ground. I definitely understand your take on the competition level. This gentleman is also a guy who's fought in LFA, which I think is huge. I mean, just like you, LFA is just a really good regional promotion. Like a lot
Hold
of.
up, let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there, because I'm glad you brought that up. I saw someone tweet this the other day, and I immediately knee jerk. I thought, "Whoa, this is incorrect," and then I thought about it. The tweet said, "Quote: Sorry, but not sorry. I love the LFA, but if there's any division for whatever reason, I'm not interested because I don't think their talent level's up to par." 155. And I thought about it, right? Because when you read a tweet or a post or a comment or hear something from someone whose opinion you respect, and they say this LFA division is not exciting, I'm not interested in it, you're like, oh, well, maybe it's like one of the lesser populated divisions, blah, blah. You're 155. You go, hold on a second. But think about it. What's a big indicator of how good a regional promotion is? They're champions, right? Like I go sometimes based off of like, how strong is this regional promotion? Who did they put? Like, who did they put in the UFC? You know, for example, in college football, who is killing it in college football? When you look at a personnel and roster base, the teams that are putting the most bodies in the NFL, it's kind of the same scenario. And man, you think about the LFA's lightweight division, how many guys that have come out of the LFA's lightweight division have gone on and had moderate to successful UFC careers? Not many. Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I would just say, like, it is a promotion, though, in general, where we have seen a lot of, UFC talented fighters,
Right.
Brendan Allen, Eric Anders. I would just say kind of it's like a developmental thing. I think we'll see as time progresses here that those other divisions get some more, some more fighters that, move up and go to the UFC. I just think
doesn't that sound crazy, though? I hate to interrupt you again, though. Like, lightweight. We're talking about lightweight here, right? Like,
yeah,
155 pounds.
Right, yeah, because it usually, if you look at the various promotions, yeah, it's usually a weight class that sticks out. But I see what you're saying there. It can be a little discouraging, I guess, from one view. But at the same token, I think that they're a promotion that knows what they're doing, and I think it'll just take a little bit of time to build up.
Regardless, though, let's talk about the meat and bones of this matchup. Move on to the next one. I think obviously the path to victory for Levitt here is going to be on the ground. Flores, some things bothered me in the Frivola fight, right? If he crossed his T's and dotted his I's where he should have in a couple of scenarios, I don't think he's even in a position to get arm triangled, right? He had Frivola hurt in that fight. I think he got emotional in that fight. Do I think Frivola is far and away the best opponent he's ever fought? Yes. Do I think Levitt has the potential to be better? Yes. Again, though, back to the point I was making. We don't know what this guy is on the feet. Get this. He said in an interview, I did not even have to throw a punch until 2 fights ago. What? You hear that and you're like, yeah, no, that's true. Bruh, I watched the film. You and I both did. That story checks out. He didn't throw a single punch in his first 3 or 4 fights. Three fights, I believe. Like, what am I supposed to make of your striking game if I'm supposed to analyze what you could do if you don't throw punches? And that's not to his fault. His submission game's good. If that's going to get him the wins, more power to him. However, guys that are going to want to put money on Levitt tomorrow night have to be scared of the fact that they don't know what he's going to be like on the feet. Your last thoughts on this fight before we move on?
Yeah, I guess the closing remarks would be in addition to Flores. Like, I think Levitt, we could see him get better and better based off his age and his youth. I mean, the striking is a little concerning because we just don't have much data on it. But that said, this is a matchup, though, where I do think he'll land takedowns. I just think he's a much craftier submission specialist. He'll probably get this fight to the ground and probably win by submission. But going forward, I see your point. Like, yeah, if he faces a guy with strong takedown defense and really good striking, and we still don't know that much about it, then I'd be like, okay, like let's actually see how this goes. So,
but we've been here before, right? You and I have talked. Remember when we talked about Greg Hardy and Jorgen De Castro? The whole narrative for me going into that fight was, I'm just excited about the fact that we're going to learn something about both of these guys here. And I came out of that fight arguably knowing less. So hopefully that's not the case here. That should be a fun one. Flores and Levitt, those guys are both very talented. As we said earlier, Flores is going to try to get his second crack at a UFC contract. Nothing to hang your head about with your first crack coming in a defeated effort to a guy in Matt Frivola, who's done pretty well for himself at this point in the UFC. So moving on. This is where it gets interesting as far as contracts being divvied out are concerned, because who's more likely to get a contract if you finish someone spectacularly and someone else finished someone spectacularly? Guy A fights at 125. Guy B fights at 155. Obviously, the guy at 125 does, because they have less bodies. This fight's coming in at 125. Luis Rodriguez versus Jerome Rivera. Where the hell do I begin? First of all, you and I had a lot of frustration trying to find film on Luis Rodriguez, didn't we?
Yeah, to say the least.
Dude, I mean, why is it that – screw you, Michaela. Why is it that when you try to find this film and you try to break this down, most of the time, like, where's your sorcery, right? Some promotions have YouTube channels. There are other backdoors to do it. Most of the time, it's all good and well. For the life of me, dog, this guy's got 12 fights. And you and I were acting like King Arthur searching for the damn Holy Grail, bro. Shouldn't be that difficult. Regardless, I took away as much as I could in the little bit of sample size that we had. Shout out to my man Sean Bitter for sending me a 5-round fight, thank God, of his from 2017. Jerome Rivera, here's the deal on him. People that may not know the face to put with the name would remember Jerome Rivera for his fight with Mao UFC ranked flyweight Brandon Royval, who coincidentally were supposed to fight on the first Contender Series card as a rematch, because in their first fight in the LFA, Jerome Rivera's arm did the stanky leg after he crashed into the octagon. It is one of the most gruesome, disgusting, horrible, awful in-fight injuries I have ever seen. And, obviously you feel bad for the guy going down to Royval like that. Royval obviously eventually used that as a springboard to get into the UFC. Now Rivera is back. He's fighting Rodriguez. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Rivera, just like we talked about with the last fight with Jordan, he's another LFA guy, which I just think in general is encouraging. 125, yeah, you mentioned he fought Royval. He also fought Roberto Sanchez, who wasn't in the UFC too long, but has some experience nonetheless. So it's nice to see that he's been in there with like guys that have competed at the UFC level. So that's definitely encouraging. I guess like the kind of like perplexing / interesting thing about his record is he has one submission loss to Sanchez, but I tend to think that based off the eye test, based off his BJJ pedigree, that he is a good submission grappler. He's really crafty and tricky on the ground. And I do think that he's the better submission grappler and grappler of the two. Like you said with Luis, it was like finding the Infinity Stones basically from the Avengers with that, 5-round fight that was like split up into like 5 different videos that you sent me. So that was pretty interesting. But
speak about that too. Like, that's the point that we got to where the most or the biggest sample size in terms of film on this guy came by way of 5 separate video. Hey, guy who did that, just upload it all in one. How about that, dude? I mean, I'm sorry. Like, terrible time finding film on this guy. Continue, brother.
I mean, it was just it was so hard, but the conclusion that I came to was like, yeah, Luis could throw hands, like he's got some power, he's tricky, he's like crafty, he's powerful, he throws a lot of like unorthodox, like like spinning back elbows, which is cool. Like, I mean, it's nice that he could win by knockout in that way, and that might get him by like for the time being, I guess. But like as he moves his way up the ranks, like that is just gonna not fly as much. Like we just don't see that stuff happen at the UFC level that often because the fighters are more polished and more used to that. They're getting more equipped to the training. So I tend to think that Luis definitely could do a better job of tightening up his striking defense. I do think they both can improve in that area. But that said, I'm hopeful that happens because, again, this is the Contender Series. Both these guys are very young and improving, and they're getting the opportunity here to see if the potential that they hold is worth a UFC roster spot right here, right now. I do like to side with Rivera here. I just think he has more upside of the two, has fought the higher level of opposition. And I think is just the more polished fighter of the two. I think he's a bit more defensively sound on the feet. Should the fight go to the ground, I think he could be a threat to submit Luis. And I just think he has a bit more path to victory here. So I'm going to side with Jerome Rivera to get his hand raised.
Perfectly put. I agree. I think Jerome Rivera is due too. We have really no idea what could have happened in that Royval fight had, obviously he not broke his arm. Dude, I mean, I even long before this fight ever materialized, long before Rivera got back to this spot, watching that, is that not one of the most disgusting and awful, hideous injuries you've ever seen inside the cage? He gets and it looked so insignificant, right? Like Royval rushes, he's off balance. He's backing up. He pushes him against the fence. It just looks like a little bump against it. Man, I guess Royval is stronger than we thought because he turns around and his arm was doing the robot by itself. It was terrible. I felt horrible. It was awful.
Freaky. Yeah, we see that from time to time in sports. I remember Paul George, Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman, I guess most notably in MMA.
Marcus Lattimore in college football is a notable one too. They're all in the same category.
Yeah, it happens, but thank God that these guys go on to recover and still compete. So, yeah, it's freaky.
Oh, can't forget Kevin Ware, too, Louisville, college basketball. Happened yes. right in front of the Duke bench, and you just saw literally one moment, Kevin Ware's on the ground. 2 seconds later, that Duke bench was cleared. These dudes literally visibly ran away. Dan, so you want to be a fighter. Really quickly, though, we have to point out, too, Luis Rodriguez is 20, bro. He's fought 12 times. He's 20 years old. According to, dude, it didn't have his age on Tapology. It didn't have his age on SureDog. That is according to my man Sean Bitter, who does brilliant breakdown pieces for Cage Side Press. It said in his piece that he's 20. And if there's a man I'm going to take at his word, it's going to be him. So moving on, up to 155 pounds. I think this is my favorite fight of the evening. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What's wrong with this fight? What's good with this fight? Do you like it? Do you not? What do you say?
I don't think there's anything wrong with this fight. I think both these guys, this is my most highly anticipated fight of the card because I think that this fight will be the most competitive one. I think that they're pretty evenly matched. They're both good strikers. They both have some power. They could both throw in volume. Again, it's kind of just a question mark. They haven't just fought at the highest level yet. This is their big opportunity to do so. There is a pretty decent age gap between these two, not say as wide as Martinez versus Sainz or Shabazian versus Brunson last card, but 2 years. Mikey looks solid. I really like what I see out of him. He's got good volume, good pressure. He's a pretty technical striker, fast, elusive. He's got a solid ground game as well, though he prefers to strike. Earl's kind of same thing, long, rangy guy, kind of unorthodox, difficult to deal with. Yeah, I'm going to slightly side with Mikey here. I just think he's a bit more polished of the two. Uros is one of these guys, though, where
ton of potential,
yeah, because his age and also trains with Jared Cannonier, which I think is definitely a perk, no doubt about it. Even though they are different weight classes, I think who you train with definitely could help out your career trajectory. So I think that Uros definitely has some intangibles going in his favor, but I certainly do think that Mikey will be game, and I'm just really excited to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, and when you look at the odds, right, I think, okay, so now that I have to think about it, with Cross and Robinson off, I believe, for sure, this is the closest fight on paper, quote unquote, or according to the odds makers that we've got. Here's a reason why I believe that is. I said this a little bit to you before we started this, and when we were talking about Medic, back and forth in our DMs. I got a problem riding or putting all my faith in fighters coming into Contender Series, the UFC, blah, 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 blah. This isn't a knock on this promotion. They put on good fights. It's exciting. They're on UFC Fight Pass. I'm not trying to disparage this promotion at all. However, I have noticed in the past that there is a pattern with guys who come onto the Contender Series, come onto the UFC from Alaska Fighting Championships. And it's not by no means necessary am I saying every single fighter that comes out of Alaska Fighting Championships is not a good fighter and they can't have success in the UFC. Clearly not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, though, those guys sometimes matchmake a little bit irrationally, whether it is because they're doing it on purpose or whether it is because Alaska is -5 degrees Fahrenheit in September and no one wants to live there. I don't know. It could be a combination of things. However, most of the time, almost every time, when you watch fights from guys that seem to have, that little bit of something special in them, coming up through Alaska Fighting Championships. They're fighting guys that are nowhere near on their level. And the numbers back me up. Medic is 5-0, three KO/TKOs, 2 submissions. You know, he trains out of Anchorage BJJ. I would say that, you know, his base, well, what would you say his base is? Like, would you say he's more comfortable on the ground? Because I got that vibe when I was watching him. It's not that he's bad on the feet, but
yeah, I think he's crafty around the ground. I wouldn't be surprised. I didn't actually look into that, but I would guess based off what he's shown, his base is the ground. Yeah.
Here's what worries me though. His next to last fight was against a guy named either Jason Flowers or Jason Powers. Jason Flowers. Jason Flowers came into that fight with a stunning and shining record of 0-1. If I'm going to ride a guy going into the Contender Series, and this fight was just a little under 2 years ago. So he's had significant time since then. He got controlled on bottom for way too long of a period of time. And yeah, he won by triangle. And yeah, he set it up. But he was controlled completely on bottom for way too long of a time against a guy who is, I repeat, 0-1 for me to ride. But then here comes the conundrum. Mikey Gonzalez's talent that he's fought isn't much better. 42-60-1 combined for the lowest win percentage of any fighter's previous opponents on this card. I said to you earlier, Mikey Gonzalez was a guy when I was watching that caught my eye. I was really impressed with what I saw. He's a Pan-American BJJ champion. He's a BJJ brown belt, and nothing at all about this guy's film indicates to me that that's where he wants to fight. This dude loves to strike. And what's weird, that hook kick that he throws, dude, that hook kick from southpaw where he curves his left foot, dude, it puts guys down and it lands often. Again, though, the conundrum and difficulty in picking this fight here is when I say these two are getting ready and going into the most high level and difficult fight of their life, by far, I really mean by far. Like, these two dudes have never seen anybody as talented as one another, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. You said it. Yeah, they're kind of like mirror images of each other. Good strikers, good BJJ practitioners. We'll see. I mean, this could be this could be one of those fights where it goes to decision, but we might see the winner get a contract bonus or contract regardless because they put on such a good performance and impress the boss man himself.
Here's a question I'm going to throw at you before we get into the fourth and sad face final fight preview on this card. What do you think, if any, effect that COVID ultimately, with the effect it has on the whole sport, on the whole world, and obviously levels of uncertainty being what they are, do you think any of that's going to have an effect on how Dana goes into this? Thing about signing guys? I could totally see Dana going on, maybe not a spree. A couple summers ago, he was signing everybody. I think it was 2 years ago where it was like, you get a contract, you get a contract. I'm Oprah Winfrey for the day. You get a contract. But could we see that at an even higher pace just for the fact that, hey, I need manpower. These guys, who knows who could test positive on any given day? I need to have guys that are ready at all times. Am I crazy? Am I blowing smoke? Or do you potentially see that being a scenario?
No, I do think that's what we see. Yeah, even some of these fighters that don't get a contract right away, I think we could see them in the UFC, maybe not right away, but because I just
don't talk shit and guard like Kevin Holland the whole time and you'll be fine.
Yeah, well, he was actually the one I was thinking of. Kevin Holland did not get a contract, but they ended up signing him anyway.
It's like my favorite story ever, too, like of how he got signed. They said like 10 guys turned down Thiago Santos, and Dana just called Big Mouth, see if he takes this fight. Bang. I love that story.
Yeah, but I think they'll do it at a higher rate based off the circumstances for sure.
Potentially. I think you're right. Now, this one's a little interesting, too. So Dustin Jacoby said to my man, John Hianco, shout out John Hianco, did a great interview with him earlier this week. Jacoby believes, or at least off the top of his head, I would have to fact check it. Homie, has there ever been a fighter who is a former UFC veteran that got cut, went their way on the regional scene, got back to the Contender Series, got a contract? I'm not talking now. I'm not talking former, like Daniel Jolly was in the UFC, fought on the Contender Series, but he lost, right?
Right.
Has there been a guy to get cut, come back? Julian Erosa, right?
Julian Erosa, yep.
Bang.
That's what I was gonna say. Yep.
Bang.
Julian
Yes.
Erosa, yep.
And shout out to my man John Hyunko. Like I said, great interview. However, they both came to the conclusion that if there was another guy, there was maybe one more. Julian Erosa. That's right. Regardless, so this is a really interesting one for the reasons and parameters that we just discussed. If you are not aware of who Dustin Jacoby is, you could make a case just when you scratch the surface. Dustin Jacoby, of any fighter that's come on the Contender Series, you could make a very solid case. Nobody that has walked into the Apex or the Tough Gym to fight on the Contender Series has seen the motherfucking killers this guy has in kickboxing and MMA. Let me just read some of these off, okay, that Dustin Jacoby has fought. Right off the bat, Alex Pereira, who is in the kickboxing circle known as just a complete and total murderer, i.e. the guy who knocked out Israel Adesanya in Glory, fought him. He fought for 2 world titles in Glory, fought and stopped Carl Robertson in Glory, has wins in MMA over Cody East, Andrew Sanchez, and Tim Williams, who all fought in the UFC. Lost on his first UFC stint to Chris Camozzi and Clifford Starks, right? So what does he do? Goes over to Bellator. What normally happens when guys get cut from the UFC and go over to Bellator? The competition gets easier, right? Bellator says, psych, throws him King Mo and John Salter. So this dude, like I said, you could make a very, very comprehensive case. No fighter that's fought on the Contender Series has had the murderers across from them in their past endeavors like Jacoby has. And I think that's a serious feather in his cap. What say you?
Yeah, you said it. He's got all the experience going for him. And I like his chances here. I really do.
Me too.
I just think that he's the much better striker on a technical level. I think he has the potential to hurt.
Forgot he fought Tony Lopez too, man.
Yeah, he's fought the who's who, and I see the improvements out of him. Like you mentioned, a pre-UFC career. It's like the guy or the first UFC tenure. The guy's improved so much since then, especially like the takedown defense, which is where most likely, the opposition here will look to get him down. And I would just say the most of his opponents in general, just being that he is a good technical striker. You mentioned the kickboxing. So Flores here will try to get him to the ground. Flores trains at Team Elevation. His wrestling though is like all relying on like strength and power. Like
you talk about Flores,
right?
Bingo, yeah. Totally, 100,000%, and aggression and just full-fledged like zombified going forward, kind of like how Olynyk does, where he'll come forward and he's throwing haymakers not to land them, but just so he can get close enough to you to where he can start to put pressure on you.
Yeah, and I say that because like I just can't see Flores beating Jacoby in a strikers battle. The guy's way too tough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Flores, he's big, he's strong, he's aggressive when in top position. I think Jacoby probably gets his hand raised here. I think he probably could get it done via stoppage. He's not like a one punch KO kind of guy in general. He does have some power, but typically crafty, methodically, technical at range, use a good footwork, and kind of just wear on you down the stretch and kind of win due to excessive damage down the stretch. So I think Jacoby probably wins and gets his hand raised and gets a contract here in what should be a good fight for the time that it lasts.
And what a story that would be, right? Here, some eye-popping things too, right? Fun fact, Flores, in his 3rd professional fight, how would you like to be a fighter, right? You're 2-0, everything's great. You're going to be a UFC champion in no time, right? You could fight King Kong in a fist fight, right? Promoter calls you, hey, we got a fight for you. Oh, okay. Who's against? Oh, just this guy named Jeff Neal. His 3rd pro fight, he fought Jeff Neal, and yes, indeed, he got stopped by Jeff Neal. But Dana White even said it himself the other day in the interview with Brett Okamoto. He said number 10 at welterweight is Jeff Neal. We all know how good Jeff Neal is. Here's my point. That fight was at 170. This is a guy who used to fight at 170, fighting a guy who has been in the ring with Cody East, who is huge. He's a former welterweight fighting a former heavyweight. This is a guy, Flores, 26 years old, has not seen the type of opponents Jacoby has. However, given that he's only got a regional background, 50-28 combined opponent record. That's not bad. That's not bad at all.
Not bad at all.
Not bad at all. But 232, 134, and 1 for Jacoby. 367 combined fights in his opponents, and that does not count kickboxing or boxing. That is insane.
He's been battle tested for sure. Absolutely.
That is indeed insane. So normally when we do other renditions of this podcast where we've previewed regular UFC cards, we stop here. However, we got a fun idea, and yes, you could call this a segment. And yes, you could call this an idea that does spar some sort of, I wouldn't say carbon copy. Okay, yes, fuck it, I will. I'm completely copying one of my favorite show segments. Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio, Chris Sims is on every day on ESPN or on NBCSN. At the end, they do what they call the PFT draft. Obviously, just like picking kids to play kickball at recess, you draft them. First guy that goes off is the guy you want on your team. The last guy that awkwardly walks over is the guy that obviously nobody wants to have a part in their stable. That is kind of what we're going to do here, except obviously no one's playing kickball. We're picking who's winning a UFC contract. And how we are going to decipher, so just so we have it clear in the housekeeping, there are now 8 fighters on tomorrow night's card. Whoever ends up with the first pick will be making the pick that they believe they are the most confident in to get a contract tomorrow night. How will we decide who gets the first pick? By virtue of trivia question.
Bring it on.
And this week, I will ask AJ a trivia question. I will say, man, I will be impressed if you get this, and I'm going to give you a really good hint. So, The Ultimate Fighter, Chael P. Sonnen calls it the most difficult tournament in sports, the ultimate proving ground. 56 humans on the planet can truthfully look themselves in the mirror and call themselves winners of The Ultimate Fighter. Cut it in half. 28 of them still fight in the UFC. 16 of them are retired. That leaves 13. My man, the question is on the screen if you need reference. Of said 13, actively fighting former tough winners that are not still on the UFC roster, who has the most wins? I will give you a hint. It is not Ryan Bader.
Wait, hold on. I just want to make sure I understand this question. Of the 13.
So, of people that have won tough and are still fighting, but not in the UFC, there's 13 of them. Ryan Bader is an example, obviously. Bellator.
Okay.
Who has the most wins? And like I said, the answer is not Ryan Bader. He has the 3rd most wins.
Oh, I have a guess, but I just want to double check with my head because I think I know where you're going with this. How much time do I have?
10 seconds.
Really? All right. Jonathan Brookins.
It's a good guess. The second most, so Ryan Bader with 25 wins has the 3rd most, or 27 wins, I think, has the 3rd most wins of anybody that formerly won tough and is not fighting in the UFC. Stormin Norman Park has the 2nd most. And the correct answer to the trivia question was Efrain Escudero.
Oh, I would have never guessed him.
31-16.
Okay. Nah, I don't feel bad about it. Would have never guessed his name.
I would not have asked you that question if I didn't come up with the idea of giving you the hint of saying not Bader, because, I mean, my first jump at that, if someone asked me that, would be, oh, that's an easy one, Bader.
Yeah, it would have been mine.
Regardless. So, that being said, Davidson has the first pick. And with the first pick of the TBL draft, Davidson's going to go with Dustin Jacoby. As we talked about, Dustin Jacoby having the experience that he's had, number 1 overall pick, right? Having the experience that he's had, fighting the guys that he has, the kickboxing credentials, the acumen. Look, you and I both said, going forward, pressing towards Jacoby, getting close to him, and making this fight as ugly as possible is going to be Flores' path to victory, right? How dangerous is that when you go up against a guy that can work in the clinch and knee you coming in like Dustin Jacoby did? That's exactly how I see this fight ending. Dustin Jacoby is my number 1 overall pick for this week's draft. Floor is yours, my man. Number 2 overall pick.
What a shocker. You chose Jacoby as the number 1 pick.
Biggest favorite on the card, right? Had to go chalk. Could you hear the chalkboard?
Can't say I would have picked him myself.
Like I said at the beginning of the program, though, if Seiler had never fallen off of this card, Seiler would be my number 1 pick.
Okay, fair enough. You'll get by this week, but we'll see what the future holds. For this week, I'll pick Jordan Leavitt. I don't know how to say his last name. Leavitt.
Come on, man. Jordan Leavitt. You said you watched films on this guy, right?
I did, but I'm not a big-time name pronouncer guy. That's not what I'm known for.
Really? You didn't major in name pronunciation in college?
English was always my worst subject. So anything to do with reading, writing, it was just, I was more of a math guy. Yeah. So,
but you're going with Leavitt.
Jordan L.
You're going with Leavitt. Okay. So Jacoby and Leavitt are off the board. Let me get this card back up here. Who does that leave me with? Let's start crossing these guys off. That's the wrong document. But I just want to start crossing these guys off as we list them so I know who we have to work with. Okay. So Dustin Jacoby, number 1 pick. Jordan Leavitt was AJ Schullo's number 1 pick. I'm going to go with Mikey Rodriguez, who is a betting underdog. But like we mentioned earlier, or Mikey Gonzalez, of course. Like Rodriguez and Gonzalez is fighting, So Mikey Gonzalez is my pick now. And I'm going to go with him because I am going to pick him to win tomorrow night. Like I said, I think Medic, a lot of potential, right? Really, really heavy kicks. Really likes to hammer and go after the body. That's what I noticed too when he opens up with that kick. But again, Gonzalez, when you are a BJJ brown belt and you can tap guys and you're a Pan American BJJ champion and you decide, I'm going to give this MMA thing a try. Not only do you realize, striking's fun, but now it's your niche. Now it's where you finish guys. Now, I don't know if it's a specialty or not. That's part of the Contender Series. We're going to learn about these guys, obviously, before the contracts are given out to them. And I think no more than these 2 guys in this fight particularly, but I think Gonzalez has enough flash and has enough talent to not only get this done, but maybe spectacularly. I love this fight. I wouldn't be surprised if either guy won, but Gonzalez is my 3rd pick.
I got to be surprised. I'm kind of shocked that you chose there, but I'm pretty...
Why? Tell me.
Well, because, realistically, it could go to decision because Uros, hasn't been finished. And I think this is one of the fights more likely to go to decision, even though it is... Well, I take that back. I'm way off on that.
I'm about to say, so many people are hoping you're wrong. We're talking about the Contender Series here, man. By next week, I need to make sure I have the numbers correct and crunched. I need to know what the finish rate is, like total for the last 3 summers. Yeah. If you had to ballpark it, what do you think it is? 60%, 65%?
Something like that. Yeah, because we talk about because we talk about all these finishes in the 25-foot octagon, and then you couple that with the fact that they got extra incentive to go for the finish. I guess I was way off on that. It's minus 285. I don't know why. I thought it was a bit nicer, but I think if he wins, he could go out there and just look like put on a striking clinic. Put on a good volume performance in technique. Mine would be I'm going to go with Jerome Rivera. I don't know if he's ready for the UFC yet, but I think if he wins this fight, it could be an impressive fashion. On the ground, on the feet. I think he could even win by knockout. That was one thing I noticed with Luis's striking defense is he could definitely do a better job with the footwork, with the head movement. And Jerome is again a crafty, long, awkward guy to deal with some power. So I could see something like that materializing, and then also just the extra cushion would be he could get it done on the ground as well. So I would pick Jerome Rivera.
All right. So those, spoiler alert, those are my 4 guys I'm picking to win tomorrow night. Those are my 4 picks. So now I must operate from the standpoint as if I have to draft someone I think is going to lose. And that's the interesting part about this. And my pick, coincidentally enough, is going to be your previous pick's opponent. Here's why. And here's the caveat. Could we see developmental deals broken out as well? If there's going to be a guy on this card to get one, why not the guy who is the only one that cannot legally have a beer at a bar? Luis Rodriguez is 20 years old, as we mentioned. I mean, dude, to have 13 fight or to be going into your 13th fight and not even being able to legally drink. This dude turned pro. Let me check my notes. This dude turned pro when he was 17, dude. This dude turned pro in MMA before he could buy a cigarette, man. And Dana says all the time, young, is it the be-all, end-all? No. If I'm looking at a guy and I like him, is that something I check? Is that a box I check? Yeah. And again, flyweight, need them. Fighters to help the Mexican market or help bring up the Mexican market, could always use more of them. Wins impressively. I'll go as far as saying if he wins by finish tomorrow night, he's signed. Flyweight, they need bodies. Rodriguez, he's young, he's talented. And I just completely made a case for a guy I think is going to lose. So now it's your turn.
Mine is Uros would be my second one.
Right.
Yeah. Well, he's like the obvious one. I think you're kind of giving me that response because it's like, that was kind of like the obvious one, but like,
right. But we both know how close this fight's going to be. And as we said earlier, dude, like, outside of the training room, these two dudes have never stood across from a guy as talented as they are going to tomorrow night when they stand across from one another.
Yeah. And this might be like a little bit of a reach, but I think there is maybe something to it. Like, I think training with Jaron Cannonier and like Cannonier having the momentum that he's on right now, that could definitely, be encouraging in terms of him getting a contract. I remember it was a little bit different, but when Paul Felder was commentating for Brandon Allen's fight on the Contender Series, he was definitely saying some really good things.
Jordan Griffin too.
Jordan Griffin, yeah. So definitely, having that like guy that has established greatly in the UFC, and then you have somebody that trains with them / knows them. I think that could potentially help. It's kind of like applying for a job and you already know somebody that works for the company. So
really, that helps people get hired places?
Supposedly.
Are you sure?
I want to know from my own experience, but that's the word on the street.
Hold on. You're telling me in the United States of America, people who on resume and credentials alone aren't going to get a job over someone who knows somebody?
They say it pays to have connections.
And what better connection to have than that? At this point, everybody should have Stipe Miocic in their corner because after Alexa Camera won, I believe it was like 0.2 seconds till Dana had Stipe screaming in his iPhone speaker, "Sign my fucking boy." You remember that last summer when he won and he called Dana immediately? Like literally Dana is standing up right when the fight's over and like it came out right after that. That was Stipe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine all these guys that are in the UFC are putting a good word in for their guy. And that's what you got to do. It's kind of like if you're a fighter in the UFC and you want to talk trash and you got to back it up. But at the same token, you got to it's a risk, but it's a risk that some of these guys want to take. And if it pays off in a big way, like Conor McGregor, other fighters as well that have talked a lot of trash. I mean, that's how you make the big bucks. So it doesn't always hurt to do some talking beforehand, get excited, and talk afterwards to see how everything checked out.
Apparently, it's not a very good fight card to be on with the last name of Flores, at least according to AJ and I, because set the table, look at the setting. As I said earlier, you're picking kids to play kickball at recess, and now you're down to the last two. One of them's got to be the guy that awkwardly mopes over as the last pick. And one of them's going to be a Flores, I guess. I don't think they're related, even though it is kind of ironic that they're both on this card. Regardless, I'm going with Luke Flores. And man, what a steal by Davidson Baker. All the draft pundits are going crazy, and they love Davidson Baker's team this week because I got a guy who's already been on the Contender Series before. I got a guy whose only loss is to a guy like in Matt Frivola, who we know is talented. Again, he was a little bit inactive in between the two-fight Combate America stint and now. One of those fights was a win by injury that I think only lasted 40 seconds. So really, he's only had one fight since then. That scares me, obviously. And as we mentioned earlier, Levitt, is he green? Yes. Does he have more paths to victory? Yes. But we got to remember where Flores has been. And if your only loss in your MMA career through 10 fights is Matt Frivola, not bad. Davidson's team's looking good.
You know,
you got the last guy, buddy.
I will solidify the fact that we're going to be on opposite sides for each and every single one of these fights by picking Tyler Flores as my last pick. Flores, I mean, we both like Jacoby to win. If Flores wins, though, I would imagine it would be coming through the wrestling, some ground and pound. To the point we just talked about, he is a guy that trains an elevation type fight team with Alistair Overeem, Curtis Blades, Justin Gaethje, Trevor Whitman, etc. Just everybody that the camp is honestly just on fire right now in 2020. Haven't really dealt with many setbacks, so I think that could help should he get his hand raised. I mean, I think you're on the right side of that fight, but it's MMA at the end of the day. There's no sure things. We've seen some big favorites lose recently, and just as recent as last card, and in a high variance sport, who knows? I think Jacoby probably gets his hand raised, but of course I got to pick the last fighter in the pool.
So I'm getting these typed out at the moment. Team Davidson, Team AJ. At the end of the summer, it'll be really interesting to see, because it's not like we're predicting these, right? Like, we're not going in and saying, this is who I believe. If I were to bet money on right now, this guy's winning a contract. We've got to pick guys that we don't think are going to win, as we said earlier. All right, Davidson's first pick, Dustin Jacoby. Your first pick. Wow, short-term memory loss.
You're good.
Who was your first pick?
Jordan Levitt.
Yeah, it was. There we go. Leave it to you to get that right.
You know what I just realized? Why I can't get his name right? I didn't have the commentary on during his fights.
That's the most AJ Schullo thing of all time. Watching the fights without commentary, right? Do you do that often?
Yeah, no, I had music. I don't do it often, but for that fight, I did. I just went into it was a little different for me in the Contender series. I did a little different, but that's why I couldn't get it right. But now I have it.
All right, so. And I hate to go back and touch on it earlier again, but as we said earlier, in case you missed the beginning of the program, 4 fights now, unfortunately, we're down to for tomorrow night. Kenneth Cross versus Demonte Robinson is unfortunately off. The Nevada State Athletic Commission deemed that there was some sort of issue with his eye that they felt was disturbing enough to waive the bout entirely. Hopefully, just curiously, so I can ask you, I would have picked Cross in that fight. Would you?
I would have picked Cross too, yeah.
Did you see the fight when you watched? I saw one of his fights, bro. Maybe the most wild opening 10 seconds of a fight either. It's as if these two dudes both sprinted at each other, met in the middle, tapped gloves. I'm not even kidding. 3 seconds later, Cross is landing a Travis Brown on Stefan Struve style jumping leap punch. It's wild. Punch that knocks the dude down. He instantly climbs to mount. He's controlling him. And once he gets up, the guy's still on the ground saying like, oh, come in my guard. And like we said earlier, Kenneth Cross fights as if he thinks he's John Wayne Parr. And he looks at him like, dude, I'm the greatest striker of all time. Stand back up. These are just some of the things you'll see from Kenny Cross when he fights. And again, it's why it's disappointing that he will not be fighting tomorrow night. And neither will Demonte Robinson. Talking has prevented me from finishing this off. Your last pick was Ty. Last pick was Jose. And then Luis.
We're on opposite sides of the Flores brothers. Not brothers, but. All
right. Good guys versus bad guys. Starting tomorrow night. That was fun. That was a good draft. I'm interested next week to see, and now I'm honestly frightened to see what you're going to come at me with in terms of trivia question, because that'll be your go next week. So you got to come up with one for me.
Yeah, I'll get something by then.
I had both links ready in case you got it right too, like the trombone that I played. You got to have that ready in case, because I mean, I'll probably get it wrong. Or if you get it right. How would you be salty if I nailed it next week? Have the first pick in back-to-back weeks, put AJ on a little bit of a disadvantage?
I wouldn't be salty, no. I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be the winner, so.
You're not. Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. End of the day, bottom line, before we wrap this up, dude, I'm so freaking happy the Contender Series is back. I'm so happy they're having these fights. I'm so happy that it's still going through and that we're still going to be able to see it. It was called into question, I mean, particularly by myself, especially in March, April, when we were all kind of figuring out and formulating exactly what life was going to look like. No, I'm not saying that the first thing I thought about was the Contender Series, obviously, because like I said earlier, the NCAA tournament was canceled. I had other things to grieve about. But this is literally my second favorite thing or form of entertainment, I believe, of mine in the world, but only behind the NCAA tournament. And it speaks for itself. As you said earlier, the incentivization for these guys to go out there and not only win, but have the thought in the back of your head, like, dude, I'm here to win a UFC contract. I leave here, I have failed. And knowing I could get my hand raised, do my job, and still fail on that mission. That's what gets these guys fighting the way that they do. The smaller cage, and think about the fact that these guys, you know, for a lot of them, are fighting in front of whoever the hell wants to watch for the first time in their lives too. There's so many things to add into it. Dana White sitting 10 feet from you. Again, you should be more than well aware, if you are still here and listening to this podcast, what we're in for tomorrow night. Wish it was 5 fights. Unfortunately, it's going to be 4. But then the best part is we do it all over again next week.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And with hopefully 5 fights this time. But stuff happens, and you'll just keep adding to your over bet on the 10 fight cancellation or 10.5.
Yeah. So we're at 1 now. We're at 1 already. But no, not even fights that are canceled, because dog, that would 10.5. That'd be minus 5,000. I'm talking like fights that have been able to stay together long enough for you and I to break down and you and I to research, only for it to fall through, right?
Yeah.
Just like the one did today. We're going to be seeing more of that, man. And like, yes or no, do you think the 5 fights we have for next Tuesday, do you think that stays put and no one falls off?
I can't look into the future, but sure, yeah. I'm optimistic that they're going to stay in touch. Yes.
Well, I'm not saying pull out a crystal ball. I'm saying just use your imagination, my man.
The imagination looks bright. I think we get all 5 fights next time. I think that this card was an outlier, and we're going to be looking at that under 10.5 fights here coming up here. I think that you're going to be sweating that under a little bit. You might hedge your bet on that under.
The MMA gods just whispered to me, tell your friend that pandemics are in that same kind of sense too. Pandemics don't really, answer to anybody else either. So I need to stop. We're letting too much negative energy into this podcast right now. All 5 fights will stay. How about that? We'll be positive. And kind of the same nature with some of those fights next week too. They're going to be interesting. AJ and I will have put in the work in terms of breaking down and research for that one to be right back here next week, so he can make up for that deficit. He'll surely be in as far as the draft is concerned. AJ, you got any last thoughts, man? I'm going to see you tomorrow for the Loudmouth Breakdown podcast. Me, you, and Marcel. Any last thoughts, bro?
Yeah, if you guys aren't already subscribed to the Loudmouth MMA network, you could do so on SoundCloud. We're, as Davidson said, myself, Davidson, and Marcel, we're all breaking the UFC card down on Saturday tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. And then next time, I would just like to say right out of the gate, I will do a better job of pronouncing a name or two that I get wrong this time, as it'll just be primarily contingent on whether or not I have that commentary on and if we have a funny last name. Haven't exactly look at those next week Contender Series, but Levitt will stick with me from now on. I'll just say that.
Yeah, dude, that's a good point too. Like, I've been so locked in and focused on this one. Like, I know JP, I think JP Buys is on next week. Oh, TJ Laramie's on the card. Oh, Vanessa Demopoulos is on the card. King Impa. Oh, next week's cool. Next week's fun.
Yeah.
Wow. Anthony Adams is fighting Impa. Oh yeah, next week will be fun. All right, man. Well, like we said earlier, subscribe, if this content is something that's right up your alley. We'll be right back here next week. Maybe same time, maybe around it, to break down the second edition and begin the aforementioned championship parade for Team Davidson. Subscribe, we'll see you guys next week. For those that do not know, also Loudmouth MMA Podcast Breakdown Network, Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network Breakdown. obviously this is a sign that the podcast needs to be over. Tomorrow, AJ and I and Mr. Marcel. Until then, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for joining. We will see you next time.
Peace out, guys.